Hello and welcome to YHTV's Flowing into Awareness with visionary and master intuitive Anatara. I'm Christina Suzuma, your host of this program. This is episode 26, Going Beyond Your Threshold of Suffering. Hello, Anatara.
Hello, Christina.
Let's go beyond.
Yes. I was going to jump right in and say, so how's your suffering today? And I thought that that is very apropos, actually, because we often, when we ask someone, how are you doing? Or how are you today? Very frequently, the immediate response we get from someone is about whatever they feel they are suffering over or suffering with. Oh, my back hurts, or the kids have been sick, or I've just lost my job, or
Change the community. Oh dear!
And this was exactly what I was thinking when this subject popped into my mind. That what is our threshold of suffering? We each have a level or a layer of beingness that allows us to see our lives in terms of some kind of suffering or not. And some of us have a greater tendency toward attaching ourselves, tracking ourselves to our line of definition of suffering, and some of us don't. But we all have different levels and different scales in relation to what we call suffering, which I'll go into again in a minute. And that to me shows how willing an individual is to to look at themselves, or to look at their lives, or to take sort of charge of what they are paying attention to. So to me, it's a simple thing. It's an easy question. Do we like to suffer or not? Is suffering, are telling ourselves that we're suffering, is that a normal thing to us or not? Are we suffering? Yes or no? What does that mean to us? And I think I spoke about pain, a few sessions ago, where and this is a similar kind of thing. Is suffering, the definition of suffering, the idea of suffering, has to do with how we place ourselves in relationship to the things that are happening with us, or for us, or to us. And one person may twist their ankle and say, "Oh, yay, I can sit on the couch for a week." And someone else will say, "Oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me in the world. I'm really going to suffer through this, and because this has happened to me, all sorts of other things in my life are going to suffer from it. I'll be uncomfortable, I'll be unhappy, I can't get to work, I can't ride my bicycle, whatever it might be." And it's important to understand that I'm not putting any judgment on how this works for each of us as individuals, but what are we willing to consider in terms of suffering, and what does suffering mean to us? What does suffering mean to you?
Oh, to me, boy, I have such a high threshold. It goes above and beyond, I think, than the average individual. So what is suffering? Yeah, I have to tell you, it would be. What's interesting is I do believe, Anatara, through my youth, I had so many trials with health and losing individuals in my life and things, and at that time, I would have considered suffering. But I think as the years have gone on, and what I've seen as a body worker and experienced is, yes, you're absolutely right. Everyone has a different perspective. Everyone has a different, because of experience, they have a different tolerance level, should we say, acceptance level. And when they say you get older, you get wiser, it's true, because you suddenly realize, boy, stubbing my toe really wasn't that bad. Having that migraine headache really wasn't that bad after all. And I do believe that if we're able to shift that perspective, that in itself begins to bring positive energy to what that quote unquote suffering might have been.
Yeah, your point is speaking to exactly what I'm sort of after here. Which is that what do we call suffering? When we believe that we are suffering, what does that do to our perspective? And when I talk about going beyond your threshold of suffering, I really mean going beyond your perspective of what suffering is and what suffering does or means to you. Because when we believe that our life is one of suffering, or that we have to suffer in order to exist, which is a common, I believe, misconception that many of us have and perhaps don't even recognize. When we believe that we have to suffer to exist, or that existence must include some sort of suffering, then I believe we're really masquerading. Instead of just being who we are, it's that the suffering sets up a certain kind of expectation about what life is going to feel like, and it keeps us from taking the sort of the broader, expansive steps of believing that even things that we have considered to be suffering are really just things that we're learning about, things that we are learning through. So if we can go beyond our threshold of suffering, it doesn't mean that we accept or take on more pain. It means that we see that threshold is an arbitrary, sometimes, concept that prevents real life from happening. It prevents us from being happy, or just being at peace a lot of the time, because we're looking at what we've described as being suffering rather than looking at what the balance to that is, or what the other part of that is.
Yes, and I do believe that some perspectives of what the suffering is also laid out by people who have guided us in life. You see, because I see some kids do certain things and they laugh about it. Meanwhile, the parent or elder is like, "Oh, what did you do?" And they just create a whole different level of perspective onto the situation.
It's so true, and there is really, the tendency to believe in being a martyr. If I suffer, if I sacrifice, then
it sounds very religious right now.
but those themes are in everything.
Yes.
If I sacrifice myself, if I work harder than I would, might want to, if I work harder than my neighbor, if I work harder than my friend, and that causes me a little bit of pain or a little bit of suffering, I am a better person than they are. So we get caught in these loops, and even if we're not thinking I'm a better person than they are, we might be thinking to ourselves, I am a better person because I am struggling and I am suffering to do it. I'm not getting as much sleep as I want to. I'm not eating well. I've taken a job of lesser income because that makes me a good person. But there's that imposition of the idea, I've suffered a little bit to gain a little bit. And that's the sort of the myth. That's the legend of the martyr. That's the legend of self-sacrifice. That's the legend of I am better because I have given up something. And giving up things in many ways is also defined by suffering. That there is, that means suffering as well. So a couple things to look at. How do you as individuals see suffering? When you think of your life, in what ways do you perceive you are suffering? And when you identify some of those things, do you feel that suffering is valid? Does that suffering help you in some way? Is that suffering something that you want to maintain? Or is that suffering something that you would like to unravel and change into another theme about yourself, another story about yourself, another idea about yourself? Within everything that we say or believe is suffering, there is an equal amount of information that is not about suffering. And I keep using the word suffering, and I really want to emphasize that it's just a word. It's just the application of an idea on us. on our personalities, on our behaviors. So, can you behave the way you have been, and can you behave in the way you always have, even in those definitions of suffering, but redefine it to be learning? As I do this, I might have called it suffering before, but now I'm going to describe it as being learning. I'm going to describe it as myself experiencing something new. I'm going to describe it as myself deciding that this is something I want to do rather than I'm doing it because suffering makes me valid, or suffering makes me look better to someone else, or suffering gives me an identity about which I feel good. So switch it around, switch it up after you have identified what you believe is suffering. And then, look at people that you know really well. Look at your parents, your grandparents, your relatives, political figures, historical heroes. What is it about who they are and what they have showed you that has been defined by their suffering? Are they important? Are they renowned because they suffered in some way? And what is it, what fantastic and brilliant acts of kindness and love and sacrifice came through what you have defined, or society has defined, as being suffering? And could we have learned those things without calling what those people went through suffering? And could they have taught us these things, demonstrated these things to us without putting themselves through suffering? It's a bigger concept of what the world is. And when you apply it to yourself, you can then choose to live your life in as meaningful a way, but without having to feel or take on what you do as suffering. How's that?
Yes, as you were speaking, it brings me back to an episode that we had on the Magical Medical Tour, episode 81 with Dr. Glenn Woolman, and he goes through the 6 categories of wellness, basically, and the 6th category, or the 5th category, is behavioral patterns, and he brought up a really great concept of rewriting the script. Rewriting the script of what you do, how you think daily to make the changes and the shifts in your life. And then it brings me also back to your previous episode, 25, about attracting where we are in life. If we continuously look at something as suffering, we will continuously place ourselves in that position. So this is wonderful. This topic is wonderful, Anatara. It's very deep. It's very full, and I'm sure there is a lot more to this. Well, I'm sure you'll have a part 2 very soon.
It's coming.
Yeah.
and I really thank you for bringing it back around to the tracking and the attracting. That that one definitely invites the other. So that's in a practical way, that is very, very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this wonderful piece of insight that you've shared with us today. It's a lot. I think you've just touched the iceberg, and now the rest of us have went, let's go a little deeper now. Thank you so much, Anatara, for sharing your insight with us today. And of course, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us in this new platform of education and information. We're always grateful for your continuous support, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on how we can serve you better. We invite you to join us live on Tuesdays for Magical Medical Tour at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Wednesdays for Trinity of Life at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, followed every other week with Flowing into Awareness with Anatara. You can also connect with Anatara by following her on Twitter at Anatara, and of course through her own website, anatara.ca. Anatara.ca. And of course, we're always love to hear your comments and suggestions and feedback. Give us a call at 818-LETS-TALK. 818-LETS-TALK. Until next time, namaste. YHTV's Magical Medical Tour. Come join Dr. Glenn Woolman and Christina Suzama as they journey through the healthcare galaxy, interviewing doctors, healthcare practitioners in the attempt to share ways to achieve optimal health. Join us on yogahub.tv every Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern.
Universe brings you what you need when it wants, and you kind of have to open yourself to it. And a lot of times, I just say it out loud and say, this is what I would like to do, but I don't know. And so a friend of mine introduced me to it, and I started going in the last 3 years. So I've been overseas in the context of medical trips to Honduras, Panama, and this last year I went to Ghana